Are you really living? Or just avoiding death? Not the poetic kind of death, the quiet one, the kind that doesn't come with a scream, but with slow days, days where nothing happens, but everything is lost. You feel it, don't you? That subtle erosion, that sense that something inside you is evaporating, like a candle burning in an empty room. No warmth, just the fading light. No one talks about this kind of death, because it wears no black robe. It wears your habits, your distractions, your silence. You tell yourself you're just resting, that you're thinking, that you're planning, but deep down, you know you're not pausing life, you're postponing it indefinitely. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "Man has lost the ability to be alone with himself, and so he chases distractions until he realizes life has passed." And that's what's happening, isn't it? You're not lazy, you're not lost. You're just afraid to stand still in front of the mirror of time and see nothing reflected back, because every second you let slip is a second you'll never be able to explain. You've built a life of delays, of not yet, of maybe tomorrow, of soon. But soon never came. And now the weight of all that untouched time is pressing against your ribs. You pretend you're in control, but deep down, you know, you're dissolving, not with pain, not with trauma, but with something far more invisible: absence. You are haunted, not by the idea of dying, but by the slow suspicion that you've already begun, and you're still breathing. But the worst part? No one sees it, because this kind of death doesn't cry for help. It scrolls, it sleeps in. It says, "I'm fine." It looks like life, but it feels like decay. And so, here you are, half alive, half lost, afraid to jump, but terrified of staying still. Not knowing what's worse, the risk of failure or the certainty of fading. But let's stop pretending. It's not death that scares you most. It's realizing you've already started dying, even while breathing. It sounds noble, doesn't it, to wait for the right time, to gather your strength, to prepare yourself just a little more before facing the unknown. But there's something darker beneath that logic, a hidden tremor behind every postponed decision. Because what you call preparation is often just fear dressed in perfectionism. You say you're not ready, but maybe you just can't bear to prove yourself wrong. Maybe you fear that trying will confirm what the voice in your head already whispers: you were never enough. So you protect yourself. You wait. You polish the plan. You make the list. You dream in secret. And then you wait again. But time is not a bank where you store potential. It's a river that doesn't stop, and it doesn't wait for your confidence to catch up. Every time you whisper "not yet," you cast a silent vote against your own life. And the world doesn't notice, because from the outside, it all looks reasonable, responsible, even wise. But you know the truth. You're not waiting because it's smart. You're waiting because it's safer to imagine than to risk being seen. And so your life becomes a museum of unopened doors, each one hiding not failure, but the fear of it. You've convinced yourself that readiness is a destination, that one day you'll wake up with no doubts, no fear, all clarity. But that day doesn't exist, because clarity doesn't come before the leap. It comes after the fall, or never at all. And deep inside, you know this. You're not unprepared. You're just scared that if you start, you'll realize the version of yourself you've romanticized doesn't actually live here. But let me tell you what's worse than failing. It's never knowing who you could have become, because you chose the comfort of waiting over the pain of becoming. Every second you delay is a second you tell your soul, you're not worth the risk. And little by little, that soul stops believing you. There's a strange comfort in thinking, in circling your mind around the same questions, the same fears, the same infinite what-ifs. You convince yourself it's productive, that you're searching for clarity, that you're preparing to act. But deep down, you know, you're not thinking to move, you're thinking to hide. Because thought, for all its brilliance, can become a perfect disguise. A velvet cage made of philosophy, logic, and abstract self-awareness. where nothing hurts, but nothing lives. You've read the books, you've studied the theories, you can name your wounds like chapters in a textbook, but naming is not the same as healing. Understanding is not the same as becoming. You tell yourself that one more reflection will lead to action, but the truth is, you're using reflection to avoid the one thing that terrifies you more than pain: commitment to the present moment. Montaigne once said, "The soul that has no established goal gets lost," but it's more than that. The soul without a direction turns on itself and devours its own clarity. You don't lack insight, you lack motion. Because somewhere along the way, you began to believe that stillness equals safety, that observing life is enough, that watching your thoughts dance in elegant spirals would eventually lead to change. But spirals don't lead anywhere, they only circle the void. And now you're lost in a labyrinth of your own intelligence, not because you're broken, but because you thought that knowing yourself was the same as becoming yourself. It's not. Knowing the door is there means nothing if you never place your hand on the handle, if you never walk through the fear. Thought can be a bridge, but too often it becomes the border, and you stay behind it, intact, but exiled from your own life. At some point, you stopped feeling, or maybe you just got tired of being disappointed. So you told yourself, "I don't care anymore." And for a while, it worked. You felt less. You expected less. You stopped getting hurt, but you also stopped healing. Because "I don't care" isn't peace, it's armor, built out of shame, failure, and 1,000 silent defeats. Indifference isn't freedom, it's anesthesia, a slow self-erasure where you protect yourself from pain by avoiding all feeling. And yet, even numbness has a cost. You stop dreaming, you stop desiring, you stop recognizing your own hunger for something more. Everything becomes muted, not painful, not joyful, just neutral, a flat line of the soul. And maybe that was the goal, to avoid the highs and lows, to survive instead of burn. But life doesn't grow in neutrality. It needs risk, it needs ache, it needs the kind of desire that scares you. Because the absence of pain is not the presence of life. It's just decay in slow motion. So when you say, "I don't care," what you're really saying is, "I once cared too much, and it broke me." But there's a truth beneath that truth, the fracture you're avoiding, that your indifference is not a shield, it's a wound. And wounds don't disappear by being ignored. They fester quietly, until the day you wake up and realize you've built an entire existence around not feeling anything at all. That's not strength, that's surrender in disguise, and the life you're protecting yourself from is the only one you'll ever get. There's a lie we all quietly agree to, that time is ours, that we have enough of it, that tomorrow will always be an option. But your body knows better. It keeps the score. You feel it in your fatigue, in the dull ache of routine, in the flicker of dread when another year disappears and nothing inside you has changed. Youth tells you time is infinite, but adulthood reveals the countdown, and not the dramatic one, the invisible one, where freedom begins to rot into repetition. You think you're in control, but look closer. How much of your time is really yours? How many hours are swallowed by distractions, noise, and decisions you didn't even make? They told you time was a gift, but they didn't say it came wrapped in silence. That you'd spend years trading your essence for comfort, that your freedom would become a contract, signed not with ink, but with attention. You scroll, you wait, you drift. And the price, pieces of yourself, not all at once, but little by little, until you forget what they looked like. Time doesn't knock, it doesn't shout, it whispers, and you only notice it's gone when you try to remember what you did with it, and nothing meaningful comes to mind. So ask yourself, without noise, without pretending, what are you paying with your time? Which part of you is being sold, silently daily, for the illusion of safety? You don't need a crisis to feel the urgency, just honesty, the kind that presses against your ribs when the room is quiet. The kind that knows you're not waiting for the right moment, you're surviving in delay, And time, real time, doesn't care what you're waiting for. You've said it before, maybe too many times. This time I'll change. I'll start on Monday. Next week will be different. And for a moment, you believe it. You feel the pulse of new beginnings, the breath of a future not yet broken. But the moment passes, and so does Monday. And again, you find yourself back where you swore you'd never return. It's not laziness, it's grief. Grief for the self that keeps trying. Grief for the parts of you that still hope and still hurt. Because each broken promise leaves a scar, not on your schedule, but on your sense of identity. Your brain learns, it remembers, and over time it stops trusting your voice. It whispers, don't try again, you'll only fail. Don't risk it, you won't survive the shame. And so, you don't. You delay. You distract. You shrink. Not because you're weak, but because you once tried, and it cost you more than anyone saw. You carry that cost. In silence, every time you hesitate at the edge of change. And yet, here's the paradox. The part of you that's avoiding pain is already in it. You think you're protecting what's left, but what's left is already fading. From lack of use, not lack of worth. There's no enemy here but the echo of old wounds, and every "I'll start later" is just another way to stay safely incomplete. But something inside you still burns, maybe faintly, maybe quietly, but it's there, not screaming for transformation, just aching for honesty, for a version of you that doesn't need to promise anymore because they've finally decided to begin. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Not all time is wasted in adulthood. Some of it was stolen long before you had a say, by the silence of your childhood, by the chaos in a home that didn't know how to hold presence, by parents who were there in body, but absent in soul. You don't just inherit features, you inherit ways of seeing time, love, and yourself. Some of us were taught urgency, some were taught fear, but many, far too many, were taught to wait. To wait for safety, to wait for attention, to wait for someone to finally show up and say, "You matter now." But they never did. And so, you learned to disappear. You became efficient in surviving, expert in waiting, skilled in self-abandonment disguised as patience. Now, as an adult, you wonder why you can't live with intensity, why presence feels unnatural, why joy feels undeserved. The answer isn't in your failures, it's in the rhythm you were trained to follow, a rhythm of absence, not connection. It wasn't your fault, but it became your story, a script written in other people's wounds, but performed in your life. And here's the quiet tragedy. When you grow up never seeing presence modeled, you confuse stillness with danger and intimacy with exhaustion. But that's not your destiny. It's just the beginning. You weren't shown how to live with truth, but you're still here. Which means you can choose to learn, to write a different rhythm, not to blame, not to resent, but to reclaim time that was never just lost. It was stolen. And now, you get to steal it back. Close your eyes. Not in meditation. Not in hope. Just in raw honesty. Imagine this. You have 72 hours left, not to die dramatically, not to say goodbye in cinematic light, but to feel the weight of everything you've delayed. What would you stop pretending? Would you still act like scrolling numbs the emptiness? Would you still tell people you're okay when your soul has been whispering for help? Would you still wait for permission to become what you've always known you could be? Time terrifies us, not because it ends, but because it forces us to confront the things we've kept hidden, the dreams we shelved, the truths we swallowed, the love we withheld, especially from ourselves. If it all ended in 3 days, the pain wouldn't be in the leaving. It would be in the realizing how many of your choices weren't choices, how many of your days were lived in shadows of obligation, shame, or silence. Realizing you weren't living, you were rehearsing, hoping someday would finally feel like a real life. But someday is a fantasy. And time is not waiting for your courage to mature. It moves without guilt, without pause. So ask yourself quietly, if it ended tomorrow, would your existence have been a scream or just a whisper no one ever heard? There's a pause between the person you pretend to be and the one that keeps waiting inside you. It's not loud, it's not tragic, it's just silent, like dust on a book you swore you'd read one day. You didn't mean to abandon yourself. You were just surviving, just making it to the next day, just postponing the real you until things felt safer. But here's the truth. No one says out loud, safety never comes. Not the kind that frees you to become, not the kind that grants permission to exist fully. And so you delay, then delay again, until you can't tell the difference between protection and paralysis. Time isn't cruel. What's cruel is believing you had infinite time to postpone your own becoming. You didn't fail because you weren't enough. You failed because you were told again and again that you could wait to be whole. But the soul doesn't wait. It fractures. It forgets. It fades. Schopenhauer once said that life is a loan with no guarantee of return. But if you're still breathing, the account isn't closed. There is no going back. But there is still something left. A thread. A choice. You can't reclaim the years you lost. But you can choose, in silence, to let die the version of yourself that only ever waited. And from that death, something begins. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but like a breath that finally fills your lungs without guilt. You're not alone. And yes, there's still time, but only if you stop pretending you have all the time in the world. You're not alone. And yes, there's still time, but only if you stop pretending you have all the time in the world.